referral on this bill.
Thank you very much. I am going to ask your indulgence to kind of set aside my role as chair for 8 or 10 minutes and take on the role of advocate for this bill, which I drafted and introduced. Then I'll put my chair hat back on after that and ask the committee if there's questions, and then open the mic to interested public who've signed up to testify. Senate Bill 335 is grounded in one core principle. And I'll say it now and again at the end of my remarks, and I ask you to keep it in mind throughout the discussion of this bill. And it's this: the governance of our regulatory agencies should be free from pronounced influence by the industries they regulate. To me, that's a very straightforward element of good government, and I would have some trouble knowing why anyone would disagree with that. And as I look into ORS around sections 526 and 527, I'm persuaded that our board and Department of Forestry fall short of that standard. And let me repeat the standard once more. The governance of our regulatory agencies should be free from pronounced influence by the industry they regulate. This bill is intended to bring the governance of ODF closer to that basic standard. And it makes 3 changes in current law, and I would like to ask staff to project the first of 3 slides. I have a slide for each of those 3 changes. Here's the first. It strengthens the conflict of interest language for Board of Forestry appointments. Our current statute provides that no more than 3 members of the board may derive any significant portion of their income from persons or organizations that are subject to regulation under ORS. And this is 3 members of 7. Statutorily, the Board of Forestry has 7 members. As a practical matter, that language is taken to entitle the industry to 3 of the 7 Board of Forestry seats. If you've been around this world for a while, those are referred to as timber seats. The 335-3 changes the language such that up to 2 Board of Forestry members can derive significant income, which is specifically defined to enhance the statute's clarity. It is not defined. Significant income or significant conflict is not defined in current law. Can significant income from forest operations or timber products. One of these 2 seats is unrestricted. It can be anyone working anywhere for anyone. And the second is provided for an owner of woodlands of 5,000 acres or less. Now, these seats are permitted, not mandate. These requirements don't have to be met, but they are permitted. And I want to say right here, there will be a -4 amendment. I've been in conversations about the language about conflict of interest, what makes a significant conflict of interest. And I'm agreed that it needs some work to be more precise. Current language is more restrictive than my intention was. So you'll see a -4 when we hear this bill again that makes a little revisions there. And then I have a bottom line, what I would say is the public policy rationale behind this change. Central principle of good governance is that public policy decisions should be made as free as possible from individual, professional, and financial interests. When 3 of the 7 seats governing a regulatory agency are filled by employers or shareholders of the regulated industry, that standard is not met, especially when thousands of the knowledgeable and qualified Oregonians are available to serve who do not work for that regulated industry. Next slide, please. I'd like to tell you about the second of the 3 changes that 335 makes. This bill dissolves the Regional Forest Practices Advisory Committees, and I was not aware of these committees until a few months ago, and I think they do really important work. There are 3 of these advisory committees, and by statute, at least 2/3 of the members must, quoting statute, be private landowners, private timber owners, or authorized representatives of such landowners or timber owners who regularly engage in operations. Now, these committees are staffed extensively, I'm told, by ODF personnel, and they provide input on possible impacts on timber industry operations of new rules or policies that are under consideration. Now, and here's an important point to me. No advisory committee exists. There are no standing committees within ODF to represent other stakeholders in Oregon forest policy. Groups focused on water resources, wildlife habitat, climate, recreation, tourism, the list could go on. 335-3 dissolves these standing committees and provides that the Board of Forestry may establish a work group to research, assess, or provide recommendations on any issue or question as necessary to achieve the purposes described in the establishing statute. This gives the board flexibility to access input from any stakeholder group it chooses, wherever it chooses. And as I drafted this part of the bill, I was in conversations with the department. And what I heard from them was these committees provide valuable input. And I completely believe that. There's a, I would think it's impossible to craft good forest policy without significant and ongoing input from the timber industry. It's such an important stakeholder group. Then I asked, do you need them to be standing committees, or are there other avenues for that input? And I was told it doesn't have to be like this, doesn't have to be standing committees. And you could think you could probably list 10 different ways, conduits for that input from the industry to the Board of Forestry. There are, of course, public hearings on all of their rule changes, just as there are for our committees. Board industry individuals are perfectly free, like any citizens, to talk to Board of Forestry members or department members to initiate letters. They can initiate the input. The board or the department can ask for the input. I would envision that there very well could be complex rules proposed. If I were a board member, I'd say let's have some input, testimony, or working group from the industry on that. So it can be done very flexibly. My concern is with standing sort of internal committees to the department that represent just one of the important stakeholders. Again, I'll be the bottom line here. Input from the timber industry on prospective rules and policies is essential. There are multiple channels for providing that input, whether solicited, I said that a moment ago. Embedding standing committees for just one of the several relevant stakeholder groups is a structural impediment to balanced and unbiased policy decisions. And let me kind of quote from one of the letters that have been submitted on OLIS for this hearing to sort of give a little example of how the dynamic, which can be a little subtle. Quoting from the letter, at the last Board of Forestry meeting on March 3rd, the agenda clearly stated that, quote, there will not be an opportunity for the public to provide live oral testimony, end quote. Yet the one group that was provided specific public comment time was the Forest Trust Land Advisory Committee. That's another committee that's not named in this bill, because it was, quote, a statutorily established committee that advises the board on state forest policy. So they got oral testimony time, but nobody else did because of time constraints. You can see how we have an unequal structure of input opportunities to the board from the diverse forest stakeholders and interest groups. So I am not concerned that we're going to be lacking industry input without these standing committees. Additionally, considerable personnel resource currently used to staff these committees can be redirected to other ODF needs. I don't want to overstate that, because I also asked the department, do you think that this is costing you significant staff time? And they said it's a fair bit, but they weren't convinced that this change to sort of ad hoc work groups and committees, which would also need some staffing, would save a lot of resource. So I don't want to overstate that point. And finally, slide 3, please. Last point, and this one is a little bit different. This one is not particularly applicable to this agency or forestry. I put this forward as a general principle of organizational structure that makes sense to me. It would transfer authority to hire or discharge the state forester from the Board of Forestry to the governor. Right now, the board hires and fires the state forester. That is to say, for for everyone's clarity, the director of the Department of Forestry. This bill gives the governor authority to hire or discharge the director, known as the state forester. This is intended to align ODF with sound organizational practices generally. Over time, forest practices have become one of the most contentious and politicized issues in the domain of state government. The dramatic challenge of catastrophic recent wildfire seasons have intensified that dynamic. The governor is the state's highest elected official, selected by and accountable to all Oregonians, as well as its chief executive officer, responsible for the quality and performance of executive branch agencies, including ODF. In my view, it's not reasonable or organizationally effective to hold the governor to that responsibility if he or she lacks authority over the agency's director. Thank you. You can remove that slide. My final comment would be, especially on that last point, I've received questions whether this bill was motivated by the example of any particular individual, or either on the board, in the department. You know, is this geared to today's circumstance and today's individuals? And I'd like to say the answer is flatly no. I believe in this as good organizational structure today, and I think it will be in the future, regardless of who holds what position. So, colleagues, I ask for your strong and careful consideration of Senate Bill 335, based on the straightforward principle, once more, that the governance of our regulatory agencies should be free from pronounced influence by the industry they regulate. That concludes my advocacy remarks. Would be happy to see if committee members have any questions before we open the hearing to the public. There will be other opportunities for questions, but I wanted to let you have it right now. I see no hands, and with that, I see Senator Kennemer's hand. Yes, Senator Kennemer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find your remarks of considerable interest, and I'm sorry I didn't have access to or whatever, I didn't anyhow achieve access to the -3 amendments. I guess I have some concerns. I'm a little caught off guard, but if I remember, most of our boards, I have presumed that our boards and commissions were selected with people with expertise, and that they were self-governing because they were to make advice. And I don't think they're advocacy groups. I think they're responsible people. For example, years ago, I served on the board of psychologist examiners. I believe that 5 of us were psychologists, and then 1 was an attorney, because we certainly needed legal information, and I can't remember what the other person was. But anyhow, we were charged with determining what was in the best interest of psychologists, and I have seen that across the years. There have been fights about the Board of Forestry, but it would seem to me that you would have the experts making those decisions rather than making it into a political concern, which is, perhaps a naive perspective, but that's my initial analysis or thought, and I appreciate your patience with expressing.
Thank you for your comments, Senator. I think that gets to the issue of whether we have a pool of Oregonians with sufficient knowledge and experience and background to serve who do not have the conflicts of interest cited in this bill. And you and I and others will have more opportunity to talk about this. I think you bring up an important point in a future work session on this bill. But I would like to get to public comment and hear what interested folks have to say.